Alright, hi everyone, this is going to be a quick video, and I mean hopefully real quick, on the topic of the feast. A lot of back and forth on, can we only keep them in the land, can we keep them here, and what does it mean to even keep them anyways, right? So I just want to present some some other sides of the equation, some things that we should think about, and some things for all of us really that we should be aware of and concerned about and careful about. So the first thing I want to point out is that the very first Passover that ever happened was in Egypt, right? It was outside of the land, so that's the very first one. And we have, as they went to the land, there was a couple times in the Bible we see that they did keep the Passover. They kept feasts outside of the land. Go look for yourself in Joshua 5:10. It says, while they were camped, the people of Israel encamped at Gilgal, they kept the Passover on the 14th day. And in Numbers 9:5, and they kept the Passover in the first month on the 14th day in the wilderness of Sinai. So you have a couple right there. We clearly see that they have been kept outside of the land in the past. It had happened. Now, outside of the normal, ideally you want to keep them in the land, right? I'm fine with that. I think we all want to, especially when New Jerusalem comes down, right? Like, that's what we're looking forward to. And I want to address in Ezekiel 20 as well. If you read Ezekiel 20 verses, I'm not going to read them here, verses 10 through 16, he's angry with the house of Israel for profaning his Sabbaths plural, so the feasts are Sabbaths, they're not the weekly Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath being more important, but they were still profaning them. They were profaning them, it says in verse 16, their heart went after their idols, and we're going to tie this into something later with the idolatry and the feast, so keep an eye on that. Another thing I want to address, there's some times in Acts where Paul is in Greece, he's in Philippi in Acts 20, and it says after the days of unleavened bread. So he was marking time using the feast, right? He was very far away from Jerusalem. We see in Acts 27, he celebrates Yom Kippur on the island of Crete, not in Jerusalem. So, and we know that would have been the feast because shortly thereafter it's talking about not wanting to be traveling in the winter. So this was in the fall. He's talking about a fast, which has traditionally been happening on the Day of Atonement, that fast. So you got a couple times he's marking the occasions with that, right? So does it say if he's keeping or if he's doing anything specifically? Well, the text doesn't say, right? So we can't really make an assumption one way or another, right? So that alone should tell you to be very careful with how you're going after other people, whether you're defending it and you're going after people, or if you're against it and you're going after people. You got to be very careful on this stuff. Like, you're going to be judged with the same measure of judgment that you're giving others, right? And we know that. So at the end of the day, you should be very careful. I in researching this, I came across it's 1 Corinthians 5, and Paul is writing to them in Corinth about the feast of Passover and unleavened bread, but that's not really the context. So I personally wouldn't use that one myself as far as defending the feast away from the land. I mean, he's talking about them, but in the context of what's going on in 1 Corinthians 5:8, he's not really talking about the feast. So I'm not a fan for using that one. But here's what I will say on that, though. He does talk about the new lump and purging out the leaven. He mentions the Passover there, and he mentions all in a course of a sentence or two, right? So what's interesting to me, though, that I didn't see pointed out by anybody, is that he mentions them as a teaching, as a way to, we're supposed to purge out sin, and we're supposed to, he's using the feast as an example to these people that are in Greece, a long ways away, and new believers. So what does that tell us? That tells us he doesn't go into depth in Corinthians to explain those feasts, which means he's already taught them, actually. They are already aware of these feasts. So Paul has been with them during them as they've gone on, and he has taught them already. He had to have. Otherwise, that sentence, why would he use a metaphor on this if he'd never taught them anything on that? So he had to have taught them. So now, again, we don't know the specifics of what happened, so be careful on this. And I will say, the people that are accused of keeping the feast, they're not sanctifying priests. They're not sacrificing animals. These things are a shadow, a type of their things to come, right? And it's practice, and it's a remembrance. And I think it's ridiculous to go after people for this and, saying, oh, they don't know the days, they don't know this. It's like, it's a practice, it's a remembrance, all right? That's how I see it, at least. So, I don't want to add much more. I do want to cover in Amos 5. I don't have it up in front of me, but it talks about God hating their feast in Amos 5. And I've seen that to be, he's hating that the people are trying to do the feast outside the land, when in Amos, he's a prophet to the northern kingdom. And so what did the northern kingdom of Israel do? Now, you can go back and study the book of 1 Kings, I think it's chapter 11 or chapter 12, and you can see what started to happen when the two kingdoms separated. The northern kingdom created two golden calves in Dan and Bethel, and they intentionally picked their own days. They would have known the right days, and they intentionally picked the wrong days. They picked the days in the 8th month, and the text says intentionally picking the wrong days, going after their own heart. So they made idols for their own feast days, and they eventually were divorced, destroyed, and scattered all over, right? They were punished for that because God hated that. So those are more akin to, what people are doing nowadays with Christmas and Easter and even Halloween, right? So it's not talking about his feast days in that context. Amos 5 simply is not. So I just want people to think about this and to be careful. There's a lot of bad fruit going on in this stuff right now, and we don't exactly fully know. I've seen really good arguments both ways from the people that say don't keep in the land and the people that honor and try to remember it in their own way. Yeah, I've seen good arguments using scripture from both sides. So be very careful. There is specifically nothing in the Bible. There's nothing, especially in the New Testament, saying you can't honor or remember these feasts, right? There's no we don't see Paul the apostle saying, writing to these congregations saying you better not keep the feast, you're not in the land. But when you come to the land, it's just not in the Bible, right? So again, be careful.